Go. Okay, good evening, everybody. We are very honored to have with us Rabbi Yitzchak Bergstein, who wears many black hats, including that he is the Shliach in Oak Park here in Chicago, and he also is the head of the Chabad Chevra Kadisha. So we've talked the last couple of weeks about different subjects and topics outside of the mainstream, and I thought this would really be useful. And although it may not be the most joyous of our topics, but it's an important one for us to talk about. So we want to begin by welcoming Rabbi Bergstein. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the work that you do for the community. And welcome to our Zoom community.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. Glad you didn't give me too much of notice. I would have turned you down. But
well, I want you to be spontaneous. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about the term Chevra Kadisha. We hear it, we translate it as the Jewish Burial Society, but maybe you can give our listeners a little bit of an understanding of what this term means and what it means, not only in its definition, but what it means to the community.
So, I mean, literally, Chevra Kadisha is the Holy Society, as it said. Before the invent of funeral homes and commercialized cemeteries, the Chevra Kadisha were going back to time immemorial, were those the ones that were in charge of burial from the time of death or before the time of death until burial. The individuals that were chosen for the Chevra Kadisha were righteous individuals. A great celebration that was done when someone was initiated into the Chevra Kadisha. Like of the Alter Rabbi being joining in, but it was a holy society. It's a society of doing the holiest work that is necessary at that time at that point of life. It's referred to as Chesed Shalemes. We speak about it in next restore portion how Avram devoted so much time and effort and funds to make sure that Sarah received a proper burial, an honorable burial. We see it later on when Yaakov Avinu, when Jacob passes away. He asks his children that they should do with him a chesed shel emes, a chesed, a kindness. It's referred to as kindness of truth because it's a kindness that we don't expect to be repaid for. It's a kindness that we can't be repaid for. We're doing it for the person themselves, but the kindness is being done to cannot repay those who are involved. When we do a kindness to someone, when we do someone a favor, there's a possibility of the person who's the recipient to pay back that favor. While in these circumstances, it's not done. So it's the holy society, the holy work that's done. In general, was designated. In every town, there was a Chevra Kadisha that dealt with the passing of individuals. They were called upon before when someone was deathly ill, and they were the ones that were involved with taking care of the body from that moment, including burial, digging the graves, and so on. Today, unfortunately, and that's the way it is in our Israel. In Israel, it's that way for the most part. In places like Brooklyn, it's done as much as possible in that fashion. But outside of those areas, for the most part, it's unfortunately become a business, and everyone's devoted to the cause and so on. But there's the Chevra Kadisha in many towns. I used to mention I wear many hats, but even within Chevra Kadisha, I wear several hats. I'm very involved in the CRC Chevra Kadisha. I've been involved with them for many years, and it's been helping them with guidelines and growing the need that there's in the community. So there is Chevra Kadisha for the most part in most cities. It's dealing with the process of tahara, of preparing the body for the burial. in the Chabad community, we're more involved in the actual burial, besides for the preparation of the body. But for the most part, Chevra Kadishas in most towns deal with strictly a little bit of that portion of the process, because much of this has been taken over by funeral homes, cemeteries, and the like.
So let's back up a little bit and start talking about maybe very uncomfortable for people. When is it appropriate for a person to reach out and make the arrangements? Is that appropriate to do in advance, or do we just wait until the time comes? What is Torah's perspective on a person making their arrangements in advance?
So, they tell a story of this fellow is lying upstairs in his home on his deathbed, and his son's sitting next to him, and from the first floor, from the kitchen, comes the smell of his wife's delicious chocolate cake. And he says, "Sonny," he says, "I smell Mom's chocolate cake. I really feel I would love to have a piece of a chocolate cake." So he goes down and he goes into the kitchen, takes out the freshly baked chocolate cake, takes out and getting ready to cut the cake. And his mother comes into the kitchen, looks at him and says, "What are you doing, Sonny?" He says, "Well, Dad asked for a piece of chocolate cake. He really wants it." He says, No, that's for the Shiva." So there's that level of preparation, which I'm not going to discuss, but the preparation of before taking care of the needs prior to passing or much earlier in life is something that is supported, encouraged, especially with the intricacies that we have and the many challenges we have with the medical system, with legal systems, and many other challenging circumstances that may face a family at the time of one's demise.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. What are some things that a person who's perhaps just wants to get their affairs in order? Maybe let's start this way. When a person passes, it may never be Nishtagedach, as we say, and then they call you, what happens? What does the Chevra Kadisha do? And maybe you could also talk about what are some things that people should be sensitive to or alerted to or aware of that may go on as a matter of course in a hospital setting that Torah would not be in favor of. So could you sort of walk us through that process?
So as I said, in general, the Chevra Kadisha, from the city, I want to say, the general populace will get a call from a funeral home. The individual passed away, the family is requested a tahara, and the body be properly prepared, washed and prepared and dressed for the funeral according to tradition, and we would set a time to come and do the tahara.
So let me jump in there for a second. So when somebody is working with the cemetery or one of the Jewish funeral homes in Chicago, this is something that they should make clear that they want the Chevra Kadisha contacted. They shouldn't just assume, am I correct here? They shouldn't just assume that if they're using, quote, a Jewish funeral home, that everything's going to be done according to Jewish law. Is that accurate, or is that the sort of basic?
Unfortunately, that is accurate. While I work with many of the funeral homes, and I know many of the funeral directors, as I mentioned, it's a commercial business, and I respect them for the work they do. It's a challenging work, and they work very hard to meeting the needs of the community. But I don't think anyone will tell you that they follow entirely automatically the guidelines of Jewish tradition, Jewish law. They will do whatever the families want.
Now, within that context, when you say they will do whatever the families want, I mean, we're here in Chicago, so we're talking about a limited number of funeral homes. Are the Jewish funeral homes in Chicago, we don't have to get into the specifics, but are they equipped, if the family will tell them, are they all equipped to do everything in accordance to Jewish law That's sort of question one. And question 1A is, so what other things that a family should tell them? Should they just tell them to call Rabbi Bergstein or call their Chabad rabbi? What do you recommend to a family who's trying to set this up so that whenever that time will be after 120, they'll know that everything is done according to our laws and traditions and standards?
So yeah, the answer in short is yes. That if a funeral home will ask for, or the family will ask the funeral home for specifics, they will follow through. The challenge was during COVID, for the most part, funeral homes shut down any access to anyone on the outside, but that's a separate, for Hashem, we're beyond that. They shouldn't come back. We shouldn't have those issues. I'll say this, on the rare occasion, there has been, number of times where a family had contracted for the family dynamics with a funeral home outside the few Jewish funeral homes in the Chicago area, or the family, someone lives further out. I've traveled as far as Perth, Illinois, to do a tahara because the family was there. They didn't want to transfer the body to Chicago and back there for burial. And I met up with members of the Chevra Kadisha from Quad Cities. Together we did a tahara there in the funeral home. It was challenging because they are not equipped. The non-Jewish funeral homes are not equipped like the Jewish funeral homes, definitely not for a tahara. The facilities are much nicer in the Jewish funeral homes in many ways, and they're definitely more equipped. So they are equipped to do so, but they will not automatically do everything according to halacha. So let's talk about as far as preparation and thinking ahead, and then we'll get to the funeral process. We'll touch upon several of these issues. Planning ahead properly, and many of these issues are subjects of their own, and one should discuss it with their local Chabad rabbi, the local Orthodox rabbi, but to make sure that these things are done according to halacha. And sometimes people aren't necessarily aware that there are these issues, or issues can come up. And many times there are family dynamics that will make things challenging to do things according to halacha, and therefore pre-planning and discussing these things beforehand can avoid a lot of issues. So planning ahead will help make sure that everything is done properly, done according to Jewish law and Jewish tradition. There's less stress on the family at the time because it's a very stressful time, a challenging time. It can avoid arguments, or should say less arguments when it comes to these circumstances. A family sometimes, especially if it's a sudden death, have a hard time thinking clearly or thinking, and the funeral homes, because the funeral directors, because it's a business, though, you're vulnerable, and therefore not thinking necessarily where it should be, or the family isn't thinking, and they don't know. They'll say, "Oh, well, this should be nice, that would be nice," and not necessarily those things follow within the realm of halacha or Jewish tradition. And pre-planning ahead is, according to our sages, is a segula. It's an omen for long life. There were many known to have shrouds sewn for them, or they would sew their own shrouds. Having a set of shrouds is a school of Arichas Yamim. Having a burial plot is a school of Arichas Yamim, and those type of things.
It's a good fortune for long life, just to translate the term.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the planning ahead includes not just making sure that your physical, financial things are straightened out, that you have an actual will for financial things, but there's what's called a halachic will. Those you speak to your local Chabad rabbi, your local Orthodox rabbi. There are resources available to draw up a will that's according to halacha. That things are done according to halacha. Whether it's distribution of your assets to your children, things should be done properly with because the firstborn does receive an extra portion, and things like that. So that is one aspect that is it's a topic of its own with regards to how and what those things are done. Then there's also a healthcare proxy, making sure that someone is able to make those decisions for you in circumstances that are challenging, that has the authority to make those decisions. Those things should be done according to halacha, that they should be speaking to the proper individuals that are knowledgeable in halacha, whether it's your Chabad rabbi, your Orthodox rabbi, or a family member that is designated to be the one to speak to, to make the decisions and speak to the doctors to make the final decisions when it comes to these type of things of life, end of life questions. There are many questions, and every circumstance is different. So there's no straightforward answer for any specific situation, and it's very important. Those things are very intricate, and you have to make sure that the person is legally designated. There have been circumstances where individuals were married for many years halachically. They had a chuppah v'kiddushin, and there was a sudden accident. The husband was in just recently. Was in terrible accident, and the wife did not have the ability to stop certain things because she did not have a marriage contract, a legal marriage contract which would designate her as next of kin. So that's something that's important to make sure that there's someone designated to make those decisions. There is a contract that we have that was drawn up here in Illinois for someone to designate an individual to be the one in charge of anything related to the funeral. So any decisions that have to be made for funeral, burial, and so on and so forth, those will be made. They designate the rabbi or someone that they know will make sure that things are done accordingly, especially if there may be family circumstances that can put someone in a situation where they won't necessarily receive that proper honor, proper respect according to
Okay,
halacha.
so we've talked about how it's appropriate, just to sort of recap. And people are asking, how can they get this copy of this contract? Is it a website, and so on? And then, if we could sort of shift and talk about what happens. So when a person passes, they call you. Everything has been arranged. If you could first tell us, how do we get that? And then two, what in fact does happen? Okay.
So I can show Rabbi Epstein the file that I have. You can make the changes necessary, and anyone can receive that from your Rabbi Epstein designating however you word it. But
okay. So Rabbi Bergstein will send it to me, and I'll post it on our chat.
Okay.
Okay. So now what happens? The person's arranged everything properly. Time comes, they call you. What happens?
Okay. So a couple of items that also, as far as pre-planning, pre-planning would be also including a burial plot. The funeral homes do have pre-planning, pre-arrangements, but there are processes. I see a lot of details within that process that one wants to make sure that are done according to Jewish tradition, including, for example, today most cemeteries require a vault, a cement vault. Here's what they call as an Orthodox vault. An Orthodox vault basically is a bottomless vault. There is the biblical statement of that we come from dirt and we return to dirt. That's why we got buried in Israel. There's no casket, not even any caskets. You're buried straight inside the earth, wrapped in a talus, shroud in talus. So that's one thing that you could request is that they use a bottomless vault. When it comes to the casket, a simple old casket is what's needed. Definitely, a casket does not have any metal in it, but there's no need for any of the fancy shellac caskets and all that with all the bells and whistles, as they say. We try to use a simple, plain wood casket. So when someone passes away, and it's a conversation of its own, probably halachic issues when it comes to before someone passes. There are many questions that arise, and there are many when it comes to preparing for the passing of an individual, it also depends to a certain extent where the person passes away. But in general, let's talk about the process of what happens. Someone's, getting older, they're sick, and while they're in the hospital or their home, the tradition is there's the vidu, there's the confessional prayers that we do. It's important to call the rabbi to find out what those prayers are. If you can come and say the prayers, and those prayers are said with the person while we try to say it while the person is still sane and alert. If not, we say it on their behalf. But our prayers are said beforehand. We try to do it while they're there's nothing wrong with saying that when someone is still in a awake state, even if they have the doctors are saying several days, which obviously can be longer, but it's always said with the hope that the person can fully recover.
These prayers, by the way, include the Shema, the
Correct.
Confessional, like we say at the end of Yom Kippur, Baruch Shem 3 times, Hashem Elokim. If anyone has a specific question about them, they can be in touch with me. It's prayers that we're generally familiar with. Okay, I'm sorry. Keep going.
So no problem. Yeah, I think those are important notations. So once the person passes, there's a person who is in a state of a goysus. They're getting ready to pass. It's important to note that halachically, one should not be, the body should not be touched. We should not move them. We should not touch them. We should not move any limbs, even if their arm falls off the bed, because anything that will hasten their passing is something that we avoid. Once the person passes away, the tradition is we don't touch the body for about a half hour until after the person has been pronounced dead. The tradition is that we cover the face. We do not look at the deceased after their passing. It's painful. It's not good for the soul. There are Kabbalistic reasons that we don't look, and therefore, according to Jewish law, it's forbidden to have a viewing. We don't do any viewings. We did, but as a chaplain in the hospital, when someone passes away, right away they have to clean them up, and they put the sheet on nicely, and the family has to come in. They have to see them, and according to Jewish tradition, we cover them up right away. We also close their mouth and their eyes. Chabad custom specifically is that the family doesn't do it, that the children don't do it. They wait for the Chevra Kadisha, but usually the Chevra Kadisha are not the ones that come to the hospital or to the home at the time. But if someone's coming, they can be done. If not, someone should close their eyes and the mouth of the individual.
Now, when you say somebody, I think let's nuance this out. If a person it passes away in the hospital, it should not be the family, but is it okay if it's a doctor or a nurse who's not Jewish, or do you want to better wait for a Jewish person to come? I mean, let's walk this through a little step by step. Hopefully this will just be academic and never necessary, but it's important that we walk it through.
So we try as best we can that anyone who comes in contact with or handles the body from the time of passing should be someone that's Jewish.
So is it preferable if a family's in the hospital, the person passes, we don't want the family closing the eyes and mouth. Should they call in a Gentile doctor or nurse, or should they better wait until I would say probably
wait until the Chevra Kadisha or the rabbi comes. Someone should do it, but they definitely can cover the. Now, one thing that's important to note, which is something to prepare beforehand, if someone's in the hospital, or even if someone's in a hospice or at home, if they have any IVs or lines that run in there. The tradition is that what we refer to as dam hanefesh, any blood that comes out of the body at the time of passing. If you've seen scenes of, God forbid, in Israel, bombings, terrorist bombings, you see the Zaka coming and cleaning and scooping up earth and chopping pieces of trees or wiping sidewalks clean to collect any blood or any tissue that may have may have been there to make sure that goes to proper burial. We try whatever we can that anything that has any blood on it should be included in the burial. So if there are IV lines and things like that, those should not be taken out and thrown away, but rather should be left there together with the body that the funeral home will take, and the Chevra Kadisha would include it in the casket in a separate bag, and that goes also for any sheets or the like that may have any blood stains on them from the deceased. That they should go together with the deceased as well.
Okay, so the Chevra Kadisha. So again, let's walk us through this fictional scenario. A person is in the hospital. It's looking like it's getting close to the end. The family is there. The person is pronounced. We don't do anything before that. We don't do anything to hasten it, and so on. That's more complicated than we really have time to go into right now about those laws. The person is passed. We don't want the family doing the closing of the eyes or the mouth. We wait for their friend, a rabbi, a Jewish person preferably, and then the person is covered. At this point, is it okay for the family to go home? Must there be what we know of as the shomer, the person who sits with the body from the moment of death, or does that only begin later? The funeral home, do they send Jews? How does that work? We may have to have a second session. I don't want to keep the rabbi much longer, but hopefully this never becomes necessary. But
right.
Walk us through that step by step, the standard. I know there's a million varieties.
So depending which funeral home you're working with, many times they'll have, especially if they'll ask for that someone Jewish should come and pick them up. If it's a Jewish funeral director and so on, there's no guarantee they're going to. Sometimes they'll send a service, their livery services, for lack of a better term, that come and pick up bodies and deliver them to the funeral homes. Unless it's prearranged and it's clear that you want to have it that way, we do whatever we can. We do the best we can to do so. As far as the shomer, we try. There's a tradition of having someone near the body as a shomer, as a guardian for
that has to be a Jewish person. Am I correct?
It should be a Jewish person that's there with the body from the time of passing until the burial.
Is that a man with a man, a woman with a woman, or it doesn't matter?
There's no preference necessarily. Just someone being there. I've done shmira for women, and they're the woman that do shmira for men. In the funeral homes, they'll have one shomer that covers and all the deceased are there at the time. It's a rotation sometimes. If you're in a hospital setting, for example, Shabbos is a whole separate question, a whole separate issue. What do you do on Shabbos?
That's going to be a separate discussion. Let's stick with this.
In the hospitals, usually they'll give you a short window of time before they'll say, oh, we need a room and we got to move the body into the morgue. Things move fairly quickly. So the funeral home has to be called right away, and they'll send someone. There's also paperwork that has to be completed, and every hospital has different policies as far as releasing the body, who signs it, but you have to make sure that those are taken care of.
Okay. So the body is transported, picked up by the Chevra Kadisha. The next step is going to be the Tara. Am I correct on that?
Correct.
So the Tara is done men for men, women for a woman, and that's a volunteer crew that you call upon when necessary. Am I understanding that correctly? You ever run out of people?
In general, in the city, there are two Chevra Kadishas, the CRC and the JSS.
Jewish Sacred Society.
The Jewish Sacred Society is JSS, the CRC has their Chevra Kadisha, and depending on the preference, the CRC has a fee that they charge for the Tahara, and the Chevra Kadisha is called and they come into the Tahara. The Tahara is scheduled on the evening before the funeral. Now, according to Jewish tradition, we try to bury the individual as close as possible to passing, if possible, on that very day. Not always is it possible. Our logistics, our family logistics, are the questions that your local rabbi can answer and help guide you through. But
What are
you
the
know,
qualifications if somebody's watching on? They say, "Well, I could do that. I'd like to volunteer to do Tara." What do they have to know? Or do they have to have? Is there
So
training?
in
Or do they
general,
just show up? How does it work?
so in general, those involved in the taharas are people that have been vetted and trained by the CRC or the JSS. For the matter, in general, it's people that are Shomer Shabbos, that are vetted by the rabbis at the CRC that have come with references and so on, whatever process they have to allow someone to join. If someone specifically wants to join, then they have to go. Rabbi signing out. The CRC has a form that they can fill up, and they'll follow up with them and then go through the training process.
Okay, Rabbi, it's 9:30. I told you it'd be 15 minutes. We never had such a big crowd and such an engaged. Maybe we'll have you back a second time if you're up to it, and walk us through some more steps, because I think this is a most involved subject, and maybe not the most joyous to talk about, but perhaps the most important. And if you're available next Tuesday night, we'd love to have a part 2. We don't have to commit right now, but maybe sometime down the line.
I'll see my schedule next week. Just for a second, I'm going to. There were a couple of questions in the chat regarding tachrichim, regarding one sewing their own shrouds. I haven't done it myself. There are requirements that shrouds don't use. There are no knots involved in it. It's a challenge. You want us to know what they're doing as far as how to measure and how to mainly sew the takrichim together. They're sewn in a way where there are no knots. So the threads are loose, and it's very, very carefully woven together so that it doesn't fall apart. So that's really now regarding your questions about a men's. The talus that is used for men's is just for the burial. You cover the body with a sheet at the time of passing. That's what that's correct. One should not hold a person's hand. That's in general, that's correct. I'm not going to.
Okay, Rabbi, you'll send me a link to this, to these instructions that a person could fill out, this sort of contract that you mentioned.
Correct. I'll send you a copy that you can make any adjustments to putting your name and so on, and then you take it from there.
Okay, Rabbi, I want to tell you how much we appreciate this. Hopefully, it's only academic. Mashiach will come, the end of death for all time.
Amen.
I told you 15 minutes. We've gone over half an hour, so I really appreciate your time, and we will have you back again to talk more about this. And we thank you for your service to the community. As you said, genuinely a true chesed, a chesed shalemes. And our only greatest wish is your wish, which is that you should be out of this job and only be able to concentrate on your Chabad Notebook. Okay, good night, everybody. Tomorrow night is Maimer. Thank you again, Rabbi. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
We'll
Rabbi.
send out the recording and the agreement, Rabbi. You'll send it to me, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Yasher Koach.